My personal sense is, like anybody, when there is something small that happens, it becomes just a channel for your frustrations.
Yes.
So I really would urge the listeners of Times Radio not to read too much into a minor incident with a pen and not try and extrapolate an entire sort of characterisation from it.
Julian Payne was King Charles and Camilla's Communications Secretary for almost 6 years, and he's speaking to us here on Times Radio all week. He's with us in the studio. Morning to you again, Julian.
Morning.
Camilla is such an interesting person to talk about, actually, just because of how things have changed and how the perception of her has changed over the year. I mean, if you look at the front of Times 2 today, within the Times newspaper, from the Jilly Cooper set to the throne, which is an interesting way of looking at it, and perhaps people have forgotten those days. There was a time when people were perhaps not that as predisposed to her, perhaps, as they might have been because of Diana. What is her position currently, and how much has it changed in your mind?
Well, I think that she is now at the absolute epicenter of the next generation of monarchy. Married to the king, she is now Queen Consort, as endorsed by the Queen. It's for me, the sort of natural culmination of the last 17 years of her marriage, in which I think what you've seen is she is not wanted spin and PR, and was very explicit with me. She didn't want PR campaigns. She has simply let her work speak for herself. You know, she has had an interesting take on how she wanted to support her philanthropy. She often picks topics which are not particularly glamorous. She's focused on things like domestic violence, loneliness, old age, things of that nature. So when the Queen did pronounce her desire that she be made Queen Consort, I remember talking to people at the time and saying, if you want to know what kind of person the Queen Consort is, just look at the work she's been doing over these last nearly 20 years, and you'll get a picture of her.
What is she like then, personality-wise? She seems to be quite cheery. She seems to like a joke and a giggle. Tell us what she's like.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're starting to see some of it come through in the coverage in the last few months now. She is, I would say, very down to earth. The key thing to understand about the Queen Consort is she had really the first 50 years of her life living what you would call a sort of relatively normal life. I mean, yes, one of privilege. She never makes any bones about that. But 50 years of living in the real world before marrying into the royal institution, which is a very sort of unique and rare atmosphere. Now, for those people who are born into it, like the king, you can't ever really get outside of that space. But what she can do, because she has an innate understanding of the institution, but also 50 years of living in the real world, she's a sort of very good bridge between the two. So you see her voice and her impact in all facets of sort of the life of the king and her as a couple. She's a great advisor to the king. You know, she can probably say more with half a raise of an eyebrow than the rest of us could with several well-reasoned arguments. And yeah, she doesn't take herself too seriously. She isn't lost in a sense of self-importance, but she understands the importance of the institution. And I think that was always, for me, the crucial difference.
Yeah, that is very interesting to be able to have that ability to do that. Now, you have told us that King Charles doesn't eat lunch, which we're still reeling from. What can you tell us about Camilla? Is it true that she is obsessed by Strictly? And I wonder how upset she will be. Not upset, but disappointed perhaps that she's going to have to wait a little bit longer for the launch show.
I think you are right. She is a huge fan of Strictly. She's a fan of the Archers as well. She's been to the show so many times that she's now good friends with some of the judges, Craig particularly.
Okay.
And such is the extent of her admiration for the show that she managed to combine rather brilliantly, I thought, one of her charities, which was Age UK or Age Concern, I think it's now called, and Strictly, by inviting some elderly people to Buckingham Palace for a tea dance with the Strictly cast, which I thought was a rather clever way of
Yes.
actually combining work and fun at the same time.
I must ask you about that clip that rather bizarrely appeared on social media yesterday of the king getting a bit irritated with a pen, presumably a fountain pen. I can't remember what the words were, but it just reminded me of me, basically. And I think a lot of people would have said, well, this is a man who's probably sleep deprived, who's got a lot on his plate right now, and the last thing you need is a malfunctioning pen. And there'll be other people who say, well, actually, is that the real Charles? Does he, is he very dissimilar to the Queen in that way? Because she, didn't seem to show much emotion, but he does.
Well, I can't speak for the Queen and how much emotion she may or may not have shown, but I agree with you. This is somebody who lost his mother just days ago, and since then his feet really haven't touched the ground. He has been whisked from, London to Scotland to Northern Ireland, back to London, meeting, swathes of people as he goes. He won't have had much sleep, and when he is awake, he's either on or he's having papers. I can be absolutely certain thrust in front of him about the next thing he's about to do. And my personal sense is, like anybody, when there is something small that happens, it becomes just a channel for your frustrations.
Yes.
So I really would urge the listeners of Times Radio not to read too much into a minor incident with a pen and not try and extrapolate an entire sort of characterization from it.
Okay, we'll make sure that they don't.
No, because I mean, I'm as cynical as the next person, but I did genuinely feel for him because I could imagine it's like with your kids. It's the tiny thing that breaks you in the end, isn't it? It's the plate that's not been put away that suddenly topples you over, and you can just see that with him. It's the one thing that he's been on for 48 hours, and then a little thing goes wrong.
And actually, working with him, he is not somebody that's prone to temper. I think that when he has frustration, generally it's when things don't go particularly smoothly, and that's mostly driven by a sort of need to do things as well as can be done. So it's frustration, it's not anger. He's not prone to huge bouts of temper.
Okay, well, that's good to know. Julian, thank you very much. Julian Payne, who was King Charles and Camilla's communications secretary for almost 6 years.